I'm 22 years old, and I need to tell this story because I'm still trying to process how my family fell apart over the past year. My name is Jordan, and until recently, I thought I understood my parents and where I fit into our family dynamic. I was completely wrong about everything. Growing up, I was always the quiet, responsible kid, while my older brother Marcus was the charismatic golden child. Marcus is 4 years older than me, and from the time we were children, everyone treated him like he could do no wrong. He was charming and confident, always talking about his big plans and ambitious dreams, while I focused on getting good grades and staying out of trouble. My parents owned a small but successful accounting firm that they'd built from nothing over 20 years. They worked incredibly hard and managed to provide a comfortable middle-class life for our family. From the time I was young, they talked about how important education was and promised both Marcus and me that they'd help us pay for college. When Marcus graduated high school, he announced he was skipping college to pursue entrepreneurship. He had this grand vision of starting a tech company, even though he had zero experience or training in technology or business. My parents were disappointed initially, but Marcus convinced them that college would just hold him back from his destiny as the next big startup founder. For the next 4 years, while I worked my way through high school, Marcus bounced from one failed business idea to another. He started a social media marketing agency that got 2 clients, then folded. He launched an app that nobody downloaded. He tried drop shipping products from China, but couldn't figure out the logistics. Each failure was explained away as a learning experience, and Marcus always had a new, exciting venture right around the corner. My parents funded every single one of these ventures. Thousands of dollars went into Marcus's business ideas over those years. When I'd point out that none of his businesses ever made money, my parents would tell me I didn't understand entrepreneurship and that Marcus just needed time to find the right opportunity. Meanwhile, I was working part-time at a bookstore throughout high school, saving every penny I could for college. My parents had set up education savings accounts for both Marcus and me when we were young. Since Marcus wasn't using his for college, I assumed all that money was just sitting there, waiting for him to eventually go back to school or maybe get redistributed to me. I got accepted to a good state university with a partial scholarship. Between my scholarship, my savings, and the education fund my parents had built for me, I'd be able to graduate debt-free if I was careful with money. I was excited to finally start building my own future, separate from Marcus's constant drama. 2 months before I was supposed to start college, my parents sat me down for a serious conversation. They explained that Marcus had finally found his calling. He'd come up with an idea for a consulting firm that would help small businesses optimize their operations and accounting practices. Since our parents already ran an accounting firm, they could provide expertise and connections to help Marcus succeed. This business idea actually made sense, unlike his previous ventures. Marcus would be leveraging our parents' existing knowledge and network rather than trying to break into industries he knew nothing about. For the first time, I thought maybe Marcus had finally figured something out. Then, my parents dropped the bombshell. They'd decided to invest heavily in Marcus's new consulting firm to give him the best possible chance at success. They were putting in $50,000 of their own savings. They were also going to use Marcus's untouched education fund, which had about $35,000 in it. And they wanted to use my education fund too, which had about $40,000 saved. I sat there stunned as my father explained that I'd gotten a scholarship, so I didn't really need the full education fund anymore. They'd leave me $10,000, which combined with my scholarship and the money I'd saved from working, should be enough to get me through college if I was smart about it. The remaining $30,000 from my fund would go to Marcus's new business. I asked why they needed to take my education money when they were already investing $85,000 between their savings and Marcus's fund. My mother said that Marcus's business plan required significant startup capital to rent office space, hire employees, purchase equipment and software, and cover operating expenses for the first year. They wanted to give him every advantage possible. I pointed out that I'd worked incredibly hard for years, that I'd earned that scholarship through my own effort, and that my education fund was supposed to be for my future. My father said I was being selfish and not thinking about the family. He said that if Marcus's business succeeded, it would benefit everyone, including me. He actually suggested that after I graduated, I could probably get a good job working for Marcus. The arrogance of that assumption made me furious. I told them I wasn't agreeing to this, and they couldn't just take money that was designated for my education. My father informed me that legally, the education funds were in their names as custodial accounts, and they had full authority to use the money however they deemed appropriate. I called my aunt, my mother's sister, and told her what was happening. She was horrified and tried to talk my parents out of it, but they had already made their decision. They truly believed that investing everything in Marcus was the smart move that would pay off for the whole family. I had no legal recourse and no way to stop them. The money was transferred to Marcus's new business account, and I watched $40,000 of my future disappear to fund my brother's latest venture. I was left with $10,000 from my education fund, plus about $8,000 I'd saved from working. With my partial scholarship, it would be enough to cover maybe 2 years of college if I was extremely frugal. I moved into the dorms that fall feeling betrayed and angry. I took out student loans to cover what my remaining funds couldn't. I worked 2 part-time jobs throughout college to minimize my debt. I ate ramen and shopped at thrift stores and watched every single penny while Marcus launched his consulting firm with my money. For the first 6 months, my parents would give me updates about how well Marcus was doing. He'd rented a nice office space in a trendy part of downtown, he'd hired 3 employees, he'd landed several clients. They were so proud of him for finally finding his path and building something real. But I noticed they never talked about the business actually making money. When I'd ask about profitability, they'd get vague and say that new businesses take time to become profitable, and I needed to be patient. I stopped asking because I couldn't stand hearing them defend Marcus while I was drowning in work and school trying to fund my own education. Around the 8-month mark, the updates stopped coming. My parents got quiet about Marcus's business and would change the subject if I brought it up. I was too busy with my own life to press for details, and honestly, I didn't want to know. The damage was already done. I graduated last year after 4 years of working myself to exhaustion. I finished with about $25,000 in student loans, which could have been much worse, but was still frustrating knowing I'd have graduated debt-free if my parents hadn't stolen my education fund. I got a good job at a marketing firm and moved into a small apartment across town from my parents. My relationship with them was strained, but civil. I'd visit for holidays and major events, but I kept them at arm's length emotionally. I couldn't forgive them for choosing Marcus over me so completely. Marcus and I barely spoke. He'd occasionally text about meeting up, but I always had an excuse. I had no interest in a relationship with the brother who'd taken my future to fund his dreams. Then, 3 weeks ago, I got a frantic call from my mother at 7 in the morning. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. When she finally calmed down enough to speak clearly, the story that emerged was absolutely shocking. Marcus had fired my parents from his consulting firm, the business they'd invested $85,000 to help him start, the company they'd provided expertise and connections for. Marcus had sent them a formal termination letter and told them they were no longer needed. My mother was hysterical, explaining how they'd been working for Marcus part-time for the past year, helping run the business. They'd reduced their hours at their own firm to dedicate time to Marcus's company. They'd introduced him to their business contacts and helped him land major clients. They'd basically been building his business for him while he took credit for everything. Then, last month, Marcus hired some business consultant who convinced him that having his parents involved was making him look unprofessional and preventing him from being taken seriously as an independent entrepreneur. The consultant suggested Marcus needed to cut ties with his parents professionally to establish himself as his own man. So Marcus fired them. Not only that, but because they'd invested in the business as silent partners rather than taking any ownership stake, they had no legal claim to any part of the company. Marcus's name was on everything. The business they'd funded and built was entirely his, with zero obligation to pay my parents back. My father got on the phone and explained through barely controlled rage that they'd invested their life savings into Marcus's business. They'd expected to work with him for years, maybe even transition their own clients to his firm when they eventually retired. Now they had nothing. Marcus wasn't returning their calls, and his lawyer had sent a cease and desist letter telling them to stop contacting him about the business. Then my mother said the words I'd been dreading. They needed help. They were in serious financial trouble because of how much they'd invested in Marcus. They'd depleted their savings and taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund his business. They were struggling to make their mortgage payments and falling behind on bills. My father asked if I could loan them some money to help them get back on their feet, maybe $10,000 or $15,000 to cover their immediate expenses while they figured out how to recover from this disaster. He said they knew it was a lot to ask, but I was their daughter, and family helps family in times of crisis. I sat there on my phone, completely stunned by the audacity. They'd stolen my education fund, forced me to take out loans and work myself to exhaustion through college, all to give Marcus every possible advantage. And now that it had blown up in their faces, they wanted me to bail them out with money I'd earned through the very struggle they'd created for me. I told them no, very clearly and firmly. I said I wouldn't be giving them any money. I had my own student loans to pay off. I was building my own life and my own financial stability. What happened with Marcus was the direct consequence of their own decisions, and they'd have to figure out how to deal with it themselves. My mother started crying harder, saying I was being cruel and heartless. My father said I was punishing them for one mistake and that they'd always supported me, even if they'd made some poor financial choices. I almost laughed at calling it one mistake when they'd spent years prioritizing Marcus over me. I reminded them that they'd taken $40,000 of my education money to fund Marcus's business. I told them about the student loans I was paying, the jobs I'd worked, the stress I'd endured, because they'd decided Marcus's dreams were more important than my education. I said that if they were so confident Marcus's business would succeed, then maybe they should ask him for money, since he was apparently doing so well. My father exploded at that suggestion. He started yelling about how Marcus had betrayed them, stolen their investment, and destroyed their retirement plans. The irony was completely lost on him that he was describing exactly what they'd done to me. I hung up and blocked their numbers. Over the next few days, I got dozens of messages from extended family members saying I needed to help my parents, that they were in real trouble, that families stick together. My aunt, who tried to talk them out of taking my education fund, called and admitted she thought they'd made terrible decisions, but asked if I could find it in my heart to help them anyway. I refused to engage with any of it. I focused on my job and my own life and tried to ignore the family drama swirling around me. Then, yesterday, I got a message from Marcus, the first time he'd tried to contact me in months. He said he heard the family was upset with both of us and wondered if we could talk. He suggested meeting for coffee to clear the air. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. I was curious what possible justification he could have for what he'd done to our parents. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment, and the conversation that followed was surreal. Marcus looked successful and confident in an expensive suit, carrying a leather messenger bag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He ordered some complicated coffee drink and made small talk about his business for a few minutes before getting to the point. He said our parents were struggling financially and that they were probably pressuring me to help them. He wanted me to know the full story before I made any decisions. According to Marcus, our parents had been suffocating him with their involvement in his business. They'd insisted on being part of every decision, questioned his judgment constantly, and treated him like a child playing entrepreneur rather than respecting him as a business owner. When he tried to set boundaries, they'd reminded him that they'd invested everything in his company and therefore had a right to be involved. They'd used their financial support to maintain control over his business and his life. The consultant he'd hired had helped him see that he'd never be successful with his parents hovering over him, so he'd made the difficult decision to cut ties professionally. He acknowledged it was harsh, but said it was necessary for his own growth and the future of his business. I asked him about the money they'd invested. Marcus said they'd chosen to invest as a gift rather than taking equity in the company. That was their decision and their risk. He hadn't forced them to give him money, and he wasn't responsible for their poor financial planning. I pointed out that they'd given him their entire savings because he'd convinced them his business would succeed and benefit the whole family. Marcus shrugged and said that was business. Sometimes investments don't pay off the way people expect. Then, he said something that made my blood boil. He told me I shouldn't feel obligated to help our parents financially. He said they'd made choices that hadn't worked out, and those were consequences they needed to face. He actually used those exact words about our parents facing consequences of their choices. I asked him if he remembered that part of the money he'd used to start his business had come from my education fund, that our parents had taken $40,000 meant from my college expenses and given it to him. Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time in the conversation. He said he hadn't known that initially. By the time he found out, the money had already been invested in the business and there wasn't anything he could do about it. He said he was sorry that I'd had to take out loans, but it had worked out fine since I had a good job now. I stood up to leave, and Marcus grabbed my arm. He said he wanted to help me, actually. His business was doing extremely well, and he was making more money than he'd ever imagined. He offered to pay off my student loans as an apology for benefiting from my education fund. $25,000. He'd write me a check right now to clear my debt, and we could move forward as siblings without this resentment between us. All I had to do was accept that what happened with our parents was between them and him, and not take their side in the family drama. I pulled my arm away and told him to keep his money. I said I'd rather pay off my loans myself than accept anything from him. I told him he'd become exactly what our parents had raised him to be, someone who takes from others and feels entitled to whatever he wants, regardless of who it hurts. Marcus looked genuinely shocked, like he couldn't understand why I was refusing his offer. He said I was being stubborn and emotional instead of practical. $25,000 would change my life, and I was throwing it away because of pride. I left without another word. I sat in my car in the parking lot, shaking with anger for 20 minutes before I could drive home. Marcus had offered me money, but only as a transaction to buy my silence and complicity. He wanted to clear his conscience about benefiting from my stolen education fund while simultaneously ensuring I wouldn't support our parents against him. When I got home, there was a voicemail from my father. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it, defeated and quiet. He said they'd been served with foreclosure papers on their house. They were going to lose their home because they couldn't make the mortgage payments after investing everything in Marcus's business. He apologized for taking my education fund. He said they truly believed they were making a smart investment that would benefit everyone, and he was sorry that it had cost me so much. He asked one more time if there was any way I could help them, even just a few $1,000s to buy them more time. I listened to the voicemail 3 times, trying to figure out how I felt. Part of me was satisfied that they were finally experiencing consequences for their favoritism toward Marcus. Part of me felt terrible that my parents were losing their home. Part of me was still furious that they'd put themselves and me in this position in the first place. I called my aunt and asked her honest opinion. She said my parents had made catastrophically bad decisions, driven by their blind faith in Marcus, but they were still my parents, and watching them lose everything was going to be painful, regardless of whether they deserved it. She also told me something I hadn't known. Apparently, Marcus had offered to buy their house from them at half its market value. He'd presented it as helping them avoid foreclosure, but really, he was taking advantage of their desperate situation to acquire their property cheaply. My parents had refused because they'd finally seen who Marcus really was. They'd raised him to believe he was special and entitled, and now he was treating them exactly how they'd taught him to treat people who weren't useful to him anymore. My aunt said she'd offered to help my parents, but she was retired on a fixed income and couldn't afford the amount they needed. Other family members were in similar situations or had already been burned by lending money to Marcus for his previous failed ventures and weren't willing to help. I'm the only one who could realistically give them enough money to save their house, and I genuinely don't know if I should or even want to. They stole my education fund and forced me into debt to fund Marcus's dreams. They chose him over me repeatedly throughout my entire childhood. When I needed them to make one sacrifice for my future, they refused because Marcus's wants were always more important. Now, Marcus has everything, a successful business built on money stolen from my education fund and our parents' retirement. He's offering to pay off my loans, not out of genuine remorse, but to buy my neutrality in his conflict with our parents. He's even trying to profit further by buying their house at a fraction of its value. And my parents are finally seeing what they created, a son who believes he's entitled to take whatever he wants from whoever he wants, because that's what they taught him through years of favoritism and unconditional support, regardless of his behavior. I don't know what I'm going to do. I have until Friday to decide if I'm going to help them or let the foreclosure proceed. My aunt says either choice is valid, and she'll support whatever I decide, but she also said I need to be able to live with my decision long after this crisis passes. If I help them, I'll resent them for putting me in this position. If I don't help them, I'll feel guilty watching them lose their home. There's no good option here, only different kinds of pain. What would you do if your parents stole your college fund for your sibling, then came begging when that sibling betrayed them? Would you help them anyway, or let them face the consequences? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more real stories about family betrayal and impossible choices.